Hi, this is Dr. Diane of Dr. Diane's Adventures in Learning. Happy New Year. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you know that I love a good story. And if you're brand new to the podcast, welcome. Pull up a chair, grab your favorite hot beverage, and join us. Today, we are going to be taking a look back at some of the authors and illustrators who make a big difference in our lives. These are the people who craft the beautiful stories that uplift us, that challenge us, that make us better. So I thought it would be a really fun way to finish 2024 to listen to bits and pieces of some of the interviews that we've done earlier this year. And I want you to do a little dreaming too. Who would you like to hear on the podcast in 2025? What sort of stories do you want us to go after? Drop your ideas in the comments, send me a message. I look forward to hearing from you, and I wish you so much joy and happiness in 2025 as you continue to cherish and celebrate your freedom to read. Once upon a time, we all know the power of a good story. But who creates these stories and why do they create them? In this segment, we are fortunate to get an answer from author-illustrator Grace Lin. Grace is the beloved author of such books as Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Big Moon Cake for Little Star, and the new book that's coming out, The Gate, the Girl, and the Dragon. If you haven't pre-ordered this yet, I highly recommend you do. This book is full of wonder and warmth. It's like drinking a hot cup of tea on a cold day. You're going to absolutely love it. So without further ado, let's hear why creators create. Are you able to connect and create your books in a way that you're true to yourself?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one to answer in a short, succinct way. As an author, that's the question we all ask, right? Because writing books, illustrating books, creating books is a really, really personal thing, and nobody nobody who makes books is in it for the money. And if they're in it for the fame, they're doing it for definitely the wrong reasons, because there are much easier ways to gain fame these days. So we're all in it because we love books, and we're all trying to create something that really is meaningful to ourselves, right? But the trick is to create something that's meaningful to ourselves that will also be meaningful for others, because I always say how one of the most heartbreaking things to happen to somebody who makes books is to make a book and to put your whole heart and soul in it, and to believe that this book is something that is beautiful and wonderful and that everyone needs to see, and then to have it published and be in the world, and realize that nobody cares, that it just kind of like disappears. And that is the most heartbreaking thing. So it's not something that anyone can, and that has happened to not just me, but to many, many wonderful books over the years. All you can do is just put your best out there and hope that people see what you are trying to share with them. And sometimes you don't need a million people. Sometimes all you need is one, like that student you were talking about. All you need is one to say, yes, I see what you're trying to do. Yes, this means something to me too. And that's when you know it was all worth it.
And in a picture book, you know it's magic when the words and the illustrations come together to tell a story that neither could tell on their own. And Vanessa Brantley Newton is a genius at putting together books like this. In this next segment, we get a little dose of inspiration from her new book, Shake It Off. And I love this book. I know you don't happen to have your own copy at this point,
Yes.
but is there a favorite page, one that you would like to share with folks?
Oh, yes. There is a spot where she is climbing up on all of the dirt that has been thrown down into the well on top of her. And she shakes this off. And it's so, I'm trying to now be more, how can I say, consistent in always having a blank page where there are no words. You get to tell the story the way you want. That is my favorite page of the book, the whole book. And if you get a copy, you will see there are words. I've collaged words
There sure
around.
are.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of librarians, I don't know that they will get this, but I hope that they will be able to listen to this podcast and get a better understanding of why did Vanessa put words on the ground? Because words are very much like dirt. They can be very organic and help to grow things, or they can bury things. And words, sometimes parents, we say things to our children in that moment when they're very, you know, upsetting us, and we say things, and sometimes even saying, I'm sorry, doesn't take away the damage that's done. And all I could think about, Diane, was the words that were spoken over me from teachers. Oh, she's never going to get it. I've even heard out of a teacher's mouth, she's dumb, literally.
And those words are like death sentences.
It's like death sentences, but they're words. And if you allow them to be planted in you, and for a time, it was planted in me. It was. I thought I was dumb. I'm a stupid girl. I'm a dumb girl, you know, because the adults have said it must be true, you know, because they're an adult. And you don't know the damage that you're doing to children when you say things like that to them. And it wasn't until I became an adult and began to, yes, get some counseling. We need it.
Yes,
you know?
we do.
And I got the counseling, and, you know, it was awesome to hear somebody say to me, you don't have to live up under this kind of stuff. And I was surrounded by, I don't want to really put it out there, but I was surrounded by narcissists. People who were very much into themselves, didn't really care if the kid made it, understood, whatever. And I think as I got older, Diane, I began to see the worth inside Vanessa.
That's important.
When you see what you bring to the table, and when you begin to have a relationship with yourself, this is for adults and children, to take the moment to say in the morning, I love me. Stinky breath and all, crazy hair and all, you know, ratty clothes and all. I love me, and I'm getting better and better every single day. When you start saying little things like that to yourself, just little things, that is you packing it under and climbing up on top of every single word. When somebody says, oh, that dress is ugly, or I don't like your hair, shake it off and pack it under. And rise and keep rising until they can't ignore you. So.
Well, and this sounds like metaphor for your career at this
point. Oh, yes. That you would even go there. You are brilliant. I will tell you, I have been through hell and back in my career, from racism to classism to, she's dyslexic. She has synesthesia. She stutters. You know, and sometimes we're looking at, well, it must have been the white people that did that. No. There are people that look just like me. And they felt comfortable enough to say those things to me. You know, and it's so funny, Diane, how I climbed up on those words because those same people are trying to come back now.
Yep.
Which is the weirdest thing, because I'm like, you didn't want me then. Why do you want me now? Just keep
you are now the successful, incredibly powerful little goat at the end of this.
That's
story.
Right.
The
That's
one
right.
who is singing her own song in the trees.
Yes. Absolutely. And it's
stories also help us to deal with really big emotions. They lay them out for us, and they allow us to figure out ways that we might be able to work through them and with them. In a post-pandemic society, it should be no surprise to anybody that anxiety is on the rise. It's no longer the domain of middle school or high school. It's not even just ours as adults. We see anxiety today in preschoolers and elementary school students as well. And lucky for us, authors and illustrators are dealing with these topics in sensitive and compassionate ways. In this next segment, we're going to meet two different authors and illustrators that I've had the pleasure of having conversations with. And we're going to talk about how they've used anxiety as a vehicle for character development, for resiliency, and for coping mechanisms in their stories. First up, we're going to talk to Trudy Ludwig, whose Brave Every Day addresses anxiety and how one deals with it on the elementary level. And then we're going to talk to Hena Khan, whose gorgeous drawing Deena really looks at that for the upper elementary and middle grade reader. So enjoy these next segments.
When I've traveled around the country over the years, and this is before the pandemic, I had many school administrators, counselors, and teachers sharing with me that they've noticed a tremendous increase in anxiety in students as young as preschool. And it's been skyrocketing. And they really have a need for books that really would instill critical thinking with those kids on that topic. There are other children's books about anxiety. And by means, I'm not looking at my book as a clinical book, but what I'm trying to do is generate a conversation and incorporate growth mindset with what I'm doing here to let kids know that anxiety is not something that goes away. I know because I'm an anxious person myself. It's about managing your anxiety. And I didn't want to pathologize having anxiety in the story. I wanted to show that when you have anxiety, can I say this? You're really a badass. Yes. You really are, because you're brave, because you have to literally go beyond your comfort zone every single day to do what needs to be done. And it made me think that really only when we are afraid can we learn to be brave.
That makes so much sense.
And so I wanted to reframe. My mother would always say, reframe that. And I really wanted to reframe anxiety in a way that was better for kids who go through it, so they don't feel worse about themselves. So I had the story with a little girl who, with most kids like playing hide and seek. She just likes to hide. Hiding is what Camilla does best when she worries, and she worries a lot. And I was thinking about, well, what kind of worries do I go through? And I broke it down into 3 categories. What if, and there are a lot of books that have what if, even the title, what if.
Sure.
I can't, and I'm scared. And that's how I decided, oh, that's going to be, those are going to be my anchors for this child's anxiety. And then I was thinking, what would motivate her to be brave in her anxiety? And when you're anxious, you focus, you're very self-focused. You internalize that anger or that anxiety. Sure. And I thought, oh, it's got to be, she's going to see that somebody else is going through it. And so she has empathy for that kid. And that's when she learns that her heart is bigger than her fears. She's still going to have it. There are times she's still going to have it, but she's going to make efforts in big and little ways to still show up. And just showing up is brave. Absolutely. For these kids,
The idea was really the fact that for many children, who are experiencing anxiety, like Deena, they don't know what it is, and they may not think, or their family may not think that they have any reason to be anxious, and so it can kind of sneak up in this very, subtle way at first until it grows, and that's what I wanted to share, like this journey of her, dealing with these sort of uncomfortable symptoms, but it's not overwhelming her to the point where she can't function. She's really just going through her life, but not feeling like it's something worth sharing until it gets to a point where she needs to. But I think that, a lot of times we do confuse anxiety for other things in children, whether it's, gastrointestinal or an allergy or, just growing pains. And so that was something I wanted to explore too, was, the response of the people around her in very different roles in her life. But more than that, a story just about, dealing with life and changes and interpersonal dynamics and family dynamics and this love for art and what it means to create art and to put yourself into the world and in a vulnerable position. So all of that in one little book. So a lot for
you captured all of that. And, I was just thinking as you were talking about the response of the people around her, that was so well done because, we don't necessarily know how to respond to anxiety in a young person as adults. I found myself thinking this should be required reading for adults as well as for kids.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because
we live in a world where we are overwhelmed by information. There are facts at our fingertips. There is stimuli constantly coming at us from a number of sources, whether it's the internet, the news, our friends, our neighbors, social media. And it can be easy to be overwhelmed by all of that. And that's where curiosity can be the cure, and a good nonfiction story can help provide context for all of that information and all of that overload. In this next segment, we're going to be talking to 3 different award-winning authors, Jason Chin, Candace Fleming, and Carole Boston Weatherford. And each is going to share their take on where they draw inspiration, what they write about, and how they make sense of all of that information to be able to draw a complete picture for young readers. Enjoy.
So I read a lot of science, and when a topic excites me, then I like to share what I've learned. I always tell this to kids, and when I'm doing school visits, and they know what I'm talking about because they like to tell their friends about the cool fact that they've learned. And so, when I get really into a topic, I tend to tell my, kids and my wife all about it, and go on, and they kind of roll their eyes. But that's when I know I have a good topic to write a book about, because it means I'm passionate about it, and a book is a great way to share what I'm excited about with kids. So I'd say that's the main reason that I do it. What brings me hope for the future is going to schools and meeting hundreds of kids who are all curious, who all have, who are all excited to learn and curious about science and nature and all sorts of other things. And I think that curiosity is the cure in many cases. For many things, curiosity is the cure, whether it's not getting along with other people. Well, if you show some curiosity about their perspective, then that is often the cure for conflict, whether or climate change or any of these big challenges we face. If we can harness our students' curiosity and keep it going, I think we're going to be okay.
Well, So welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Diane, and we are so fortunate to have renowned author Candace Fleming with us today. Welcome, Candy. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Diane. I'm excited to be here.
So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is you have written so many books. I mean, you've covered the gamut from picture books to history with Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, to science with the honeybee and giant squid. How do you how do you move across that wide breadth in children's literature?
I always joke and say, that it's my short attention span that, sort of allows me to do all those different things. I'm not sure if it's necessarily like the super ability that I have to move from YA nonfiction to, preschool fiction. I think really it's about what I'm curious about and what I feel like I want to write. And then I think about who I think would be the most receptive audience for those particular books. I'm thinking about, for instance, Bulldozer's Big Day. Here I was in the middle of working on The Family Romanoff, which was sort of a dark and very lengthy, really complicated process, a really complicated project. And I really just needed some escape. And so I went for a walk and I watched a couple of little boys with their mother watching construction trucks in the neighborhood. And I thought, that's exactly what I need. I need to spend a little time with little boys and construction trucks. So I actually came home and it was almost sort of a relief. So I do that a lot. I'll be working in this big complex project. And at the same time, I'll be working on a little bit of preschool. So for me, it's left brain, right brain, and it provides balance. I don't think I could write YA nonfiction nonstop all the time.
That makes sense. And I love the idea of the balance. I've been following your books for years, and I realized that so many of the things you write about are also things that I obsessed about or was curious about, which may be why I love following you. What inspires you for doing things as diverse as, say, the Romanoffs and Charles Lindbergh?
You know what? Here's the thing. And I love that you said that, because you're writing about stuff that I was really interested in. You know, when I was in middle school or high school, I've sort of started doing that seriously and consciously. Been picking topics that of course, I have to be really interested in the topic, first of all, because those projects take 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. But I've been consciously picking projects that I was fascinated by when I was in middle school and high school. And I don't think readers have changed a whole lot since then. I also think that middle school and high school might have a lot of facts to hand that I didn't have, say, when I was obsessing about, say, like the Lindbergh kidnapping. I didn't have that device in my hand that I could just click, click, click and find some facts. But here's what I think about nonfiction in the 21st century. The reason I write for middle school and high school nonfiction is because I think they have plenty of facts to hand, but they don't have any context. And I also think that that is an age group that are seeking facts. They are actively looking. They are truth seekers. And so I thought to myself, I know that they are looking and they are thinking about these very same ideas that I was when I was middle school and high school. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to pluck those ideas, one, selfishly, so that I can delve more deeply into it and examine it myself and investigate. And 2, because I think they'll appreciate the investigation.
In poetry, I consider poetry my first literary language. And Jeffrey's a poet too, as he meant. He's a rapper and performance poet. And we've got a book coming out called Wrap It Up. And it's actually about how to write rap.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I like the way that you make poetry accessible for kids today as well. A question for you all in terms of, right now, Carole, you've got over 70 books that have been published.
Right.
How do you decide who you want to write about?
I write about people that I admire, who intrigue me. But even if they intrigue me, I've got to admire them. I'm not going to waste my time writing about somebody that I don't admire. Or if I write about a historical event that is harrowing, I write about it because because I think people need to know about it. Maybe in some cases, like the Tulsa Race Massacre, new information about it was suppressed, and so many people didn't know about it. And I thought it was a seminal, but albeit horrific event in American history. I thought that people needed to know about it. So, it's got to interest me first of all, and I think I need to think that it's of significance to young people or a wider audience. And also, I don't want too many other books to have been written about it. If I can, I'd like to be first. And beyond that, hopefully there's a market for it. So, if something is I tend to write about obscure subject matter. And if it's so obscure that I think there's no market for it, I'm probably not going to pursue it, at least not at this stage in my life.
And as you're going through, and when I say the words, we're going to talk about poetry, don't turn off the podcast, because you're going to discover, as we talk to Alicia D. Williams, that poetry can be a powerful vehicle for telling a story and telling it in a way that you engage even the most reluctant reader. And for those of you out there who are thinking, I don't like poetry, you may discover that you've been a poet all along. Check out Midair, which is Alicia's absolutely glorious book that I have a feeling is going to be all the rage when award season comes out. And definitely pay attention to this next segment. And the other thing I was thinking as I was reading this, you wrote this as a novel in verse. And in my mind, that is probably the single hardest way to write for middle grade. But when it works, Kwame Alexander, Jackie Woodson, Jason Reynolds, and you make this an art form that you don't realize you're reading poetry. You're just reading a good story, but boy, you get a lot of bang for your buck with the words. How did you go about sort of taking this story and putting it into such a beautiful form?
I promise you, I am sitting here silently thanking you. So now that you gave me pause to speak, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I was just thinking how I didn't grow up really reading poetry. It was intimidating. It was not accessible. The words and the imagery I couldn't relate to. And probably what they gave me or what I was exposed to was just too hard for my palate at the time.
Yep.
Had I had novels in verse, I probably would have grown to love not just poetry, but to learn how to read and imagine at a more earlier age than later coming to it. So coming to this book, I did not intend to write a novel in verse. I did not intend to write a novel in verse. I wrote it as prose. I put it out, but initially I had Isaiah become more quiet. He became inward. So he wasn't speaking a lot. You might see that a little bit in his second journey down south, but throughout he wasn't speaking. So I got off the computer and got a pad and a notebook. A notebook and a pencil. And that's when it came out in a different form, like a staccato way of speaking. And the rhythm came out so differently. And I thought, what am I doing here? Is this what I think it is? And as I continued to commit to the process, it just flowed, not intentionally. I think he dictated how his story needed to be told. And I am so grateful to whatever higher power that it works, because I think that was my biggest fear, because I did not grow up reading this genre. I know I studied this genre as an author. I pulled every book off the shelf. Like, what are the rules? I'm looking at blogs. I'm looking at craft. There are no rules.
Which is what makes it work.
That makes it, thank you. There are no rules. Like, how do you do dialogue? What do you do? But I think it's just, to hear that, it's just mind-blowing for me and affirming to me as a storyteller.
Well, I loved it, and I agree with you. I grew up on probably the same poetry you did. It was the let's overanalyze it, and it became intimidating. And I didn't love poetry. And even when I did my doctorate, my advisor pushed me to look at poetry with little kids. And I'm thinking, seriously, you're going to make me live with poetry? But I'm so glad she did, because what I discovered then was that young people love language and they love playing with language. And it's really, if you can have fun with it and you present it not in a B, C, D way, they're going to go with it. They love it when you're engaged, when there's that emotional tug to it. And I think that what you're doing and what other authors who are doing the novel in verse are doing is you're making it so accessible at such a younger age. And maybe you're unleashing a whole generation of poets for us for the coming years.
Wouldn't that be great? We need more.
We need more poets in our lives.
I wonder if you were like me, that I know we didn't have poetry, but what I did have back in the day, cassette tapes and albums that gave you the lyrics. and I would read the lyrics. Maybe that was that poetry.
I did the same
You
thing.
know, yes.
Yeah, the album covers and the CDs and the tapes where you'd open them up and you had like the long index card
Yes.
with the lyrics.
That was our poetry.
It was, but we didn't realize that. And, everybody did that. And we were experimenting with poetry. We just didn't realize it.
Yes, that was if they gave me more of that, perhaps, right? But now that we have it in a book, you're right. Maybe we are creating a whole new generation of storytellers that can not only just, who would have thought this would have existed, right?
Yeah.
When we were kids, that they can take it and make more of it and to flip it around, because they always change what we do, and they can expand on the form. That would be exciting as well.
Well, for me, one of the things that makes a book truly good is its ability to build connections. And those can be connections that you build to characters whose experiences are the same as yours, that are different than yours, or books that open up your eyes to worlds you never even imagined. The next two authors that we are going to be hearing from are truly exceptional at being able to create worlds that connect beautifully, push boundaries, and help their readers feel like they are part of something bigger. In this first segment, we're going to be talking to Gayle Forman, whose Not Nothing was a revelation this year. And Gayle talks about rising to the occasion of your own life, and we're going to talk about the power of connection in storytelling. After that, you get to hear the remarkable James Ponti. You probably know his work from the City Spies books, where there are these amazing children's spies who go all over the world on these incredible adventures. You may know him from his work on Nickelodeon. I really love his brand new series, The Sherlock Society. And both Gayle and James are going to talk about the power of connection. Check it out. That got me thinking about the power of story and the power of connection, because I think we live in times where we're so disconnected from each other that it made me start thinking about what would happen if we started just asking people about their stories. What would we learn?
And I'm so glad you mentioned that. For one, Alex and Maya Jade, when they meet each other, they get off to a not great start, in part because they immediately make these snap judgments that assumes the worst about the other. And I think we are in a place where we have a tendency to do that, to just assume that the least generous interpretation. And of course, everybody's got so much going on in their own inner life. And once they start to connect and really understand that, it really opens up their relationship. And yes, I love the idea of the intergenerational bonding and all of that connection. And we've actually created a ton of sort of assets for educators and community members to use, including this really fun, I'll send it to you afterwards so you can see it. It's a pamphlet. It has two covers, and one of it is the guide to understanding your olds, and the flip side is the guide to understanding your youngs. And it starts out with like really funny vocab words that the youth use that we don't get. And as soon as I put an asterisk, I'm like, as soon as you read these words, they're out of date, because that's how it works with slang.
It's true.
And then the flip side, like things that my kids don't understand, like, like what is a voicemail? They have them on their phones, and AOL and all the things. And so, but as you get deeper into the pamphlet, it's actually open-ended interview questions that young people can ask older people, and older people can ask younger people, so they can get beyond the like, what do you like in school question, and what was life like when you were younger? And sort of, I'm hoping, break down those barriers so they can really start to connect on a level where they see each other as sort of peers, even though there might be generations separating them, who had the same desires, had the same fears, had the same worries. I think young people, particularly at this age, when they're starting to pull further away from their parents and more into their peer groups and into their technology, it would be really incredibly helpful and healthy for them to have these older individuals as like anchor adults in their lives who are not their mom and dad. And if they can be grandparents or older relatives, fantastic. But there's just also such a possibility in the communities at those assisted living facilities with these people who have like this wealth of wisdom. And I'm not saying that like every old person is like wise. That's kind of like a cliche, but by dint of having been alive all this time, you have a unique perspective. of the world that I think is incredibly helpful for those of us who have maybe been here less time and can't necessarily see it with that broad scope.
I totally agree. I just did a trip with my father, and he's 82, and it was fascinating for me because I told my kids later, I'm like, I think I was the youngest person on the cruise minus the guides. But I wound up learning so much just from sitting and asking and drawing out questions, and things broke down. Like, I mean, things that I was assuming. I was like, I made some bad assumptions. And by giving grace, I discovered there was so much richness to these humans that were surrounding me. And I feel like I'm blessed for having spent that time in their presence.
Seriously jealous of this experience. That sounds incredible. And it's also true to like give them time and space, because I think a lot of times I've noticed that people don't remember things. I don't remember, and then you get people talking, and then suddenly that's sort of how memory works. It unlocks a closet, and then all of a sudden things come tumbling out. And you mentioned my favorite word in the world right now, which is grace. I think if I had to think of like one word to describe this book and what I hope people take from it, it's grace. It's that we treat each other and ourselves with more grace.
And I don't want to spoil the ending. And I'm not going to spoil the ending because you absolutely have to read it. But grace comes through so strongly throughout the book, and particularly with the ending in terms of being able to create space for each other. And you definitely hit that one. No problem.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
So how challenging was it? Because you do take on some pretty weighty issues within this book. How challenging was it to sort of move from writing for adults and young adults to writing for this grade level and being able to say the truths that you wanted to say, but to do it in a way that it would be digestible?
You know, this was my second middle grade. I had a middle grade that came out during the pandemic called Frankie and Bug. And so I think that was like it didn't occur to me until after the fact, and people would read it, they'd be like, oh, she's dealing with heavy stuff. I have always written for young people and about young people. I worked as a journalist at 17 magazine for years, and we wrote the kind of stories that nobody would believe we were doing. When I would tell people, oh yeah, I went to Sierra Leone to cover the Civil War there because they're using child soldiers, people were like, what? Kids care about this? They do. They especially care about things that are happening to other young people, because even if it is completely disconnected from their own experience, there are emotional things that they understand, because adults have so much agency over you when you're a kid. And so the stakes don't have to be that high. So it never occurred to me that I had to like dumb it down or I think that I've always sort of tended naturally toward writing for young people. And so when I wrote Frankie and Bug, of course, it's like, how do you make the material appropriate? But I never really sort of thought like, oh, I have to like dumb this down or sugarcoat this, because I think kids are aware of what is going on. And I respect my reader enough to know that they will take in what they are able to take in, and that other things they may not be able to sort of get to, and maybe they might read it a few years later and see things that they haven't seen. So it doesn't occur to me that they're not going to be. It's just really more about finding the authentic voice of the character. And so once I did that, once I discovered Bug's voice in Frankie and Bug, like it brings in the humor, it brings in how kids see things, and it just felt sort of natural. And so I think you're able to kind of take on things that are going in the world and not shelter the kids, because they're not sheltered from it anyhow. They just are not, so they know it's going on. And so I would rather allow them to engage in a way that is appropriate for them to engage with adults, with their teachers and educators and parents or grandparents in their life, to kind of have a conversation with. So that's never really the challenge. The challenge, like I said, with Frankie and Bug was finding the voice. And the challenge with this one, as I mentioned earlier, was how do I have this 107-year-old man narrate in his voice, but also have it be true to Alex's voice and Alex's experience.
And
the beauty of doing school visits and talking to kids, I always ask kids if they've read the books, if they have favorite characters, and I'm always fascinated at how divergent those answers are. I would think that, okay, someone is going to win like 75% of the favorite kids, and it's not. But then that tells me that, okay, that means every character is some reader's favorite character. and they'll feel cheated if that character doesn't get the chance to shine every now and then.
Oh, I like that. So I have to ask, as part of your research for settings, did you end up having to tromp around in the Everglades?
I went to the Everglades. I didn't tromp much. I took a boat tour and I looked around. I had I did a lot though. I went to the Marine Patrol. It begins with the rescue by the Marine Patrol in Biscayne Bay. And I went to meet with them just to look at their office so I could describe their office right. And they said, no, we're going out in the boat. And they threw me on a boat and we raced around Biscayne Bay. And I talked about exploding yachts. And I'm thinking they're going to think this is ridiculous. And they're like, that happens all the time. And they told me about like rescues that they've done and yachts that have sunk. And like they showed me where some were still half submerged. And I went and I hung out with a marine biologist at the University of Miami. And we went to his lab where they're growing coral late at night. You know, so we're there in the middle of the night and we have all these grad students and they have this coral that's just come in from all these places and they're playing Marvin Gaye music to get the coral in the mood to just be, you know, make more coral or whatever. And it's just like, okay, this is really great fun to do it. So the Everglades, I felt like outdoors with the coral was buggy enough. I didn't need to actually go get buggy in the Everglades.
I say you managed to make me feel buggy and sweaty.
Yes, it is so buggy there. It is, yeah.
So you're getting ready to go on tour with the Sherlock Society.
Yes.
The tour looks amazing. You are being accompanied by some serious heavy hitting authors and illustrators on this tour. What was the genius behind that?
Well, so I don't know if when I first went on tour, they tended to send you alone. And more now the tendency, at least that I've gone with, is I'd much rather talk to someone. And the beauty of the middle grade writing community is we're pretty much all, you know everyone, or at least one person removed from almost everyone. So on a regular weekly basis, I talk to Gordon Corman and Stuart Gibbs and Christina Stern-Torvat and Karina Glazer, all these authors, these great authors. And so I try to visit with people like that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's great because it lets people who know me meet them. It lets people who know them meet me. It lets us talk in a way that's fresh so that each bookstore event, it's going to be different. Because what I talk about with Cristina Diaz-Gonzalez in Miami is different than what I'm going to talk about with Lin.and Hena Khan in DC or with Chris Grabenstein and Gayle Forman in New York. But I am very much into the concept of book joy and the concept of, I think it is positively disarming for kids when they realize that authors aren't names on a book, but they are regular people who are goofy with their friends, and their friends are also the authors you know, and we're going to let you see us be goofy. So, for example, for this book, one of the things that I decided to do a year ago, I got a bunch of deerstalker hats like Sherlock Holmes wears. And whenever I was with authors, I asked them, I said, hey, do you want to pose for me? I'm going to do. And so right now, you know, I'm releasing all these pictures of, I had over 50 authors posed in goofy poses like Sherlock Holmes. And it's not small. We're talking Jeff Kinney, Kate DiCamillo, just huge mammoth. And they write serious books, so they write goofy books, or, you know, Angie Thomas, who writes very hard books and all these things. But when you see them goofing off in the hats, you realize they're just goofy people like me. And so I wanted the tour, and I wanted all kind of the publicity around the book to really embrace this idea of joy and friendship, which is at the core of the book, but is also at the core of our industry of middle grade fiction.
You can't finish a conversation about the power of literature and the power of amazing books without addressing the elephant in the room. And it is no secret that the freedom to read is more threatened today than it ever has been. So in this next section, we're going to look for a little hope and a little action and a little what can we do to protect the freedom to read. First up, we're going to hear from Beth Ferry, who entered the scene with a remarkable picture book, Roar for Reading. And I want you to hear just a little bit of that conversation. And then we're going to finish up with Newbery Award winner Katherine Applegate. Katherine is the beloved author of such books as The One and Only Ivan, Wishtree, Crenshaw. And in this segment, we're going to talk about what happened when her book Wishtree was challenged. Enjoy, take heart, take hope. That from a library point of view, there are so many people I've talked to, authors, scientists, people who are teachers, people who are athletes, wide range of people who they got their start and their love for books at their public library. Maybe money wasn't plentiful growing up, but there was this haven, this safe place where you could find something. And, one of the things we talk about is not everything in the library is for everybody. But, just because I don't happen to like books about basketball doesn't mean that all the books about basketball should come out of the library.
I think, right. And I think that is the best part, right? Is that, you first of all, you can't know everything. You can't. Right. It's not possible. And when you walk into the library and there's so many books and you think wow, what a testament to our culture that there are so many people writing so many books. And, I always say, why do I write the books that I write? I don't know, something inspires me, something piques my interest. And that happens to all these other different people, their experience, sparks an idea. And it just is, it's not only do you get a peek into the world and, the windows and mirrors, analogy is so beautiful because
it really is.
I think of half the, especially when you're a kid and you're like, wow. Oh, that's oh, I didn't even know that could be or happen. And I just think that the books that they're trying to ban, might not be the book that I need, but it's pretty much a book somebody needs.
Exactly. And it wouldn't have been written if there wasn't a need, because it spoke to that author and there is somebody out there who needs to receive it.
When they say reading reminds you that you're not alone in the world. And I think that that's the most true statement, because I think when you're a child or even a teenager, you really sometimes think you're the only person going through something, because most of the time it's not something great. So you're not sharing it freely with your friends. You're not admitting to it. And so where are you going to get that affirmation that you need? If you can't speak about it, you can get it from the book. And that's why, I don't know, I feel like what we're doing is the wrong thing, or what the people, and I'm so proud when I hear about these librarians, the librarians that are truly, their lives are being ruined, which is another,
yes,
but standing up for books because, somebody has to.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about Roar for Reading, because you and Andrew have done an amazing job in taking this giant issue and bringing it down where it's not only understandable for younger readers, but you're offering a blueprint so that it's not just this is terrible, but you can roar. There's literally something you can do.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the book itself and maybe about what it means to roar.
Yeah, so I think, it's set in a library. And so the main character, Julius, is the son of the librarian, and she gets a letter. And it's a small town idea, where the letter comes in the mail and it's a list of books that the mayor's asking her to take off the shelf. And so, she's, of course, upset, and she takes Julius with her to go to meet the mayor, and the mayor is this little frog, and I love this little frog so much because
I agree.
I just don't know how Andrew came up with let's have a frog with a mustache as the mayor, but it feels right. It feels like somebody small-minded, like maybe a frog would be. And she tries to explain her point of view, and he explains, he doesn't explain, but he, basically says you have to do it. And since the library, so she takes the books off the shelf. And I think so much of life is, you don't really know till it happens to you, which is sad, but true. And so Julius starts to worry, are they going to take away my favorite books? Who gets to say? And so he gets upset and he roars. And the whole, history of the libraries is that lions did protect the libraries, but then they didn't need to anymore because we live in a free country. So they forgot they could roar. So once he roars, his mother can see I can't just do it. I have to fight it. And so they fight and they rally and they call other book lovers and they march and they protest. And, it's funny because like there is a little acronym at the end of the book that is like, what you can do. It's like with the roar, it's recognized that there's been a book ban, organize together, act and respect. I think the respect part is my most favorite one because, you don't have to like the book. It still can exist, like even if 500 people, 1,000 people don't like the book, that doesn't mean it can't exist. So it just kind of tells kids that they, can speak to their adults and they can say like, this isn't okay. And hopefully, this is a picture book, so it's for the youngest readers,
Right.
but hopefully, they'll at least understand that they do have, a say.
And I was thinking it might be affirming for the parent or the librarian or the teacher reading the book to the child as well. Just a reminder that you have agency and that you can help do something.
Right, especially, and I think there are, especially think about not every kid loves to read, but when you're young and you're reading picture books and you're reading early chapter books, most of them are, they're happier books, they're like happy endings and good things. So I think that children feel strongly about their books and, probably unless it's happening in their town, they don't even know that this can happen. And so I think it's also good to understand the broader picture of the world and that it's not, there are things happening out there that can affect them and they might not even know about it.
Well, and one
Well, it's interesting. It was actually one district. So they'd had it for many years and all the elementary schools read the same book and then there are all kinds of activities associated with it. And by the way, I've had so many books, especially Wishtree and Ivan used in that kind of context. And I think it's just the greatest idea because I wasn't much of a reader when I was young. And even if you don't like the books, it's such a great way to connect over reading and to share ideas and opinions and the crossing guard reads it and the lunch ladies read it and it's really beautiful. So they had done this for quite a while and they got about halfway through and they suddenly just pulled the book without explanation. They had a regular reading schedule and the families were reading at home and they were about halfway through the book. And it turned out that someone who did not live in the county or even have a kid in the public school system was complaining about a short passage in the book that had to do with reproductive strategies of trees, which are, very complicated. To quote someone, botanist, in one of these articles that followed on, trees are kinky. They have, you can have a male and a female parts on the same tree. So anyway, I got into that a bit because the book is written from the point of view of a red oak tree. And this was apparently offensive to this particular parent, got picked up by other parents within the school system. And the school board it turns out, at least from what I'm told, had never encountered a challenge book before. I think very often for a lot of these school systems, that's part of the problem. There's no go-to methodology when somebody says, I'm not really comfortable with that book. So I offered to Zoom with a school board at their next meeting. I had a message prepared and they wouldn't allow me to. So a wonderful parent stepped in and read it. And I made a little video for the kids that I put online. And it just sort of blossomed. And what I took from this was that a handful of parents can make a huge difference when these things happen, because a parent reached out and said, hey, want to come stay here? And another one got in touch with a local paper, and another one talked to the school board. And I ended up going there. And a lot of this was due to the wonderful support of my publisher, Macmillan, who was as incensed as I was. And I went and we had events at the public library. And again, librarians are the best humans in the world. This public library stepped up and said, hey, you can do it here. So we had one event, it sold out instantly. We added another one, it sold out instantly, and spent the afternoon and evening just talking to these great kids and teachers and librarians about the book. So it was very heartening. And I think it opened up a dialogue. There was one school board member there who came to talk to me. And I got the feeling that, the ball is rolling anyway.
Well, that's good. And the irony of the whole thing is Wishtree is about welcoming people. And so the idea that you would launch a complaint against this book that is about being the welcomer, to me, just baffles my mind.
It was ironic, to say the least, and not lost on most people. And in fact, the library had a wish tree out in its front lawn, and I visited another local school that had used wish tree last year and was having its second celebration of Wishing Day. And it just takes that tiny little bit of difficult humanity to make these problems happen. But it's amazing if you fight back, that people really will listen, I think.
It really
So,
is.
and this was in microcosm, of course. It's much harder when you've got a huge school system and a lot of loud voices, but I think it can be done.
Well, thank you for joining me on this look back on the Adventures in Learning podcast. These are only a few of the amazing authors and illustrators who have been willing to share their stories and their lives with us. I would love to hear from you about who you would like to hear from in the coming year, what adventures you want to go on, and what stories mean the most to you. So please drop us a line. Check out the links to the full podcast episodes in the show notes. And may your new year be bright, cheerful, and full of the freedom to read. Thanks for joining me today.